Welcome to the Grow Your Business podcast. Listen in as we discuss all things business, growth, and marketing with business owners, thought leaders, and entrepreneurs. And now, here's your host, founder of Roundhouse, the creative agency, Saul Edmonds.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Grow Your Business podcast. Today, I'm speaking with Marvin Storm around the topic, why should I be thinking about exiting my business? Marvin, how are you today?
I am ready to rock and roll. I'm excited about this topic. I get really passionate about it. So I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, it's a really interesting sort of conversation. I guess it's something which I'm sure you'll have plenty to say about, where a lot of business owners don't really think about this particular topic. But I'll let you just start to give everyone listening a little bit of a introduction, a bit of an outline of who you are, your podcast, and generally what you do.
All right, I'd be glad to. Well, I got real interested in this whole concept of business exits and the people, entrepreneurs specifically, trying to maximize the value of their business when they get to the point of selling their business. And I had my career path is, I started out in the accounting world and over a period of years migrated to starting my own business and had a couple of exits at different sizes and different types. And as always goes, every one was a little bit different. And, my last exit was different than all of the ones before. And I just got to thinking, my plan was I was at the point in my career where I was going to step back and kind of take it easy after so many years of having the pedal to the metal, so to speak, and going full tilt and full speed. I thought I would, kind of take it easy. And I figured out very quickly that life in the, slow lane after you've been in the fast lane for so many years isn't all that exciting. And so I got to thinking about, there are probably a lot of other business owners, entrepreneurs out there that really don't understand what they should do. And they don't know what they don't know. And I thought if I'd have been a little bit more dialed in, even though I'd been through it a time or two, I would have done better because every exit is different. And I just got thinking about that. And I love podcasting. I listen to podcasts all the time. And so I thought, I'm going to start a podcast. And instead of interviewing, my original thought was that I would talk with and interview, people that had sold and exited their business. But I thought about it a while, and I thought, probably what I'm going to do is talk to the deal makers, the people that help facilitate exits, the business brokers, mergers and acquisition advisors, accountants, attorneys, wealth managers, people that are involved in some part of the transaction flow of helping entrepreneurs sell their business and exit. And that's turned out to be a fascinating, path to follow, because each of these advisors and intermediaries, bring their deal stories to the table, the good ones, and why they were good, and some that didn't go all that great and why. And so every podcast has 4 different transactions, 2 that went well, 2 that didn't, and the reasons for each of why they went good or bad, and some real lessons that are learned there. And it's just been fascinating for me to see all the different twists and turns and things that happen out of the blue. And sometimes the exits go very well, and sometimes actually the businesses don't get sold because of the missteps of a business owner. So it's been a really fascinating journey for me in the last few years.
Yeah, no, that's great. So how long have you been running the podcast then so far, Marvin?
It's coming up 3 years now. It's opportunity for me to really dig in, because the podcast lasts for 45 to 60 minutes, and we really kind of dig in each of these individual transactions and talk a little bit about how they unfolded and kind of the evolution of how a deal can be smooth or have a lot of challenges and difficulties. Most of the difficulties can be avoided, actually.
Yeah.
But most people wait to the last minute, the last year or so before they start thinking about their exit, and that's not really a great idea.
Yeah, no. So from your own personal experience, I guess, and then the knowledge that then you've kind of acquired from talking to like all these different sorts of people, what would you say? Like, is there an optimal time? Like, even though everyone's experience is very different with their business and why they're going to exit and how, but is there an optimal time you would say that is good for people to start thinking about it? Like, if they're going to do that, but we can even get onto that topic of if and why then also through this podcast too. But what would you say? Is there a good time leading up to that you should be starting to think about it?
Great question. Is there an optimal time? I would say that never too early. Even if have just started a business. Years ago, I was in a kind of a roundtable discussion, and I was one of the younger members of the group, and there was a kind of a gray-haired individual that everyone sort of looked up to because he'd been very successful and had been in business for decades. And he made a comment that I always remember. He said, if you run a good business, don't worry about selling it or exiting it. The exit will take care of itself. And I bought into that philosophy, quite frankly, and made sense to me. And if you have a great business, there'll be people ready to buy it. And so don't spend so much time worrying about selling it years later. But I've since changed my attitude and philosophy on that, in the fact that you don't have to spend a lot of time, actual hours of the day or week, thinking about selling your business, but you need to start thinking about the things that are going to be important when you sell. And that doesn't take a lot of time. It takes a mindset. It takes kind of a philosophy that you develop over time of how you think about your business and what is a buyer going to want to see when the time comes. And if you can put yourself in the frame of mind of thinking about what a buyer is going to want to see, you're going to be miles ahead of the game once the time comes to sell. Because quite frankly, very few people that I've come across, and I've talked to hundreds of deal makers and intermediaries, very few people think like a buyer when they're selling a business, and they think about what they want out of the deal, how much money they want to get. They don't think what a buyer wants to get. And when those buyer and seller, attitudes or objectives and goals don't line up, it can be a very rocky road in a transition. But to get back to the answer to your question, when should you start thinking about positioning your business for a sale? It's never too early. Even though you're not doing a lot of functional things to get it ready, you do some strategic things that put you in a much better position down the road. And I can give you a number of examples of how that frame of mind will really play out at the end if we have time.
Yeah, we'll do that for sure. That was very important that you had that lead up then, explaining the final answer, because it makes, when you explain it like that, it makes complete sense. It just occurred to me too that I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this as to whether that seems to be like a sort of a correlation in a funny way between a person wishing to exit their business and then having the right sort of philosophy about thinking what a potential buyer might want, and what I guess a lot of business owners, should but maybe don't do in terms of understanding their clients too, because it's still, in one sense, it's it's a transaction. Like when you understand, like I guess like most people running a business at least feel like they understand their clients or their customers, and that's a really important part of obviously running a business, isn't it? Like knowing who they are, what they want. So why wouldn't it be any different if you're going to have this other transaction, potentially like a life-changing kind of transaction for some people?
Well, I think you're spot on there. I think that a business owner becomes really good at what they do because they do it every day from the time they walk into their office or shop or factory or whatever. They're got their sleeves rolled up and they're very involved in their business. And over a period of years and sometimes decades, they really become experts at what they do. They understand their customer, they understand the competition, they understand the lay of the land, their employees, and they have that intuitive feel that they've developed over a period of time about how their business functions and operates and where their competitive advantage is. And the problem is a lot of business owners who are entrepreneurial, have that entrepreneurial mindset. They love solving problems. They love the challenge of what kind of appears on the horizon every day and identifying those problems and solving them. And that's where they get their energy from. And they kind of shoot from the hip, because they're just so good at what they do.
Yeah,
and often they carry this attitude into they're going to sell their business the same way. They're just going to figure it out once that time arrives. It's kind of like my friend in that roundtable discussion so many years ago said, you got a great business, it'll just take care of itself. Well, statistically, that doesn't really pan out. If you look at the number of businesses that come up for sale every year, at least in the US here, between 70 and 80% of those businesses generally have a great deal of difficulty or don't sell. And so this attitude of waiting to the last minute, of waiting to figure it out when the time arrives, it's a high risk proposition. That if you do that, you're probably going to fall into the 70 or 80% that has a challenge or can't get their business sold. And for those that do sell, they have done things in advance. They have a good business, true, but they have done things that make it appealing for a buyer to be interested in their business. It's common sense, really. I mean, this is not rocket science, but it's one of those things that an entrepreneur just doesn't get around to thinking about a lot prior to the motivation to sell a business. Generally, the decision to sell is driven by an event of some type. Maybe it's a health issue that comes up. Maybe they're just getting burned out. Maybe the market is getting very competitive. There's a whole series of reasons that get a person, an entrepreneur, a business owner to the point where they think, well, now I should sell my business. And if they arrive there without a lot of preparation, the outcome isn't always as they would envision or want.
Just a quick question, just relating to that too, is how many people in your experience do the opposite of that? They not only do they plan, say, for the exit of their business, but it's actually an integral part of the strategy, say, because they want to move on to a different sort of business and they've planned ahead in 6 years' time that they're going to do that. So they know from the very start of that first business that that's what they're going to do. Like what proportion of people work like that? I mean, if any, like I'm sure some people do, but I mean, what do you think in your experience? Do you come across those sort of people?
Yeah, there's several different profiles of entrepreneurs, as you know. There are people that are just entrepreneurial in the sense that they want to sail their own ship. They run their business. It's a family business. They've run it for a long time, and that's who they are. That they've been doing this for a decade or two. Mm. And then you have the entrepreneur that is a serial entrepreneur that is much more creative and innovative and gets bored with the business. They love the creation process and the scaling process, but they get to a certain point where the business holds little interest to them and they kind of want to move on to the next thing. That type of entrepreneur is much more likely to think about an exit because he's gone through it before. And he knows that he's going to get to a point after he's been in the business for a few years where he's going to want to move on. So he thinks much more strategically about how he's going to exit his business than the type of entrepreneur that's been working in the business for a long time. And they just don't take time to think about how they're going to get out of the business. And generally, it's those type of entrepreneurs that have the biggest challenge when that time arrives because they've never done it before. They don't know what they don't know. And they think that they're just going to live forever, and that things are going to continue. They're going to the bank a lot and the business is good, great margins, a lot of profitability. Why would I want to sell my business? Well, that's when you actually should start thinking about selling a business, because you don't want to sell a business that's reached the peak of its revenue and profitability and is starting to plateau or even maybe ebb a little bit in sales growth and profits. That's not when you want to sell a business. If you just, again, walk around to the other side of the table and think like a buyer, if you're a buyer, would you want to buy a business and pay a premium for a business that has plateaued in sales and profitability and is starting to ebb off? No, you may still buy the business, but you're probably not going to pay premium dollar. You're not going to be as generous in your offer and the terms you're going to offer because you want to hedge your bet in case you can't turn the business around and grow sales again. You're going to want to hedge your bet. And so the entrepreneur will probably have to take a discount or have terms that are not favorable to him to get the business sold.
Yeah. Would you say too that there's another thing that just kind of occurred to me, which has to do with, issues that I guess everyone at some point or another's had in their business when you just don't have time to to work on your business. You're just spending all your time working in the business and you're spending, just doing whatever it is that you do, providing that service or delivering that product to people. And many business owners, as I'm sure you've see all the time and you've obviously experienced too, you just sometimes feel too busy. So I mean, I would imagine that would be like a pretty big contributing factor also for people just not feeling that they've got little enough time to do all the things that they normally have to do, let alone thinking about strategizing their exit of their business. But I mean, it's like, I imagine like a lot of different things, once you actually find out the reality of that planning sort of process, or at least strategizing it, it's not the elephant in the room that you think it is. It's more simple. What do you think about that, Marvin?
Well, I think you kind of understand the mindset of most business owners is that, the question is, why in the heck would I want to think about selling my business? I have barely enough time to get the work done that I have done. I don't have time to plan for an exit. You're crazy.
You're just too busy.
Well, I just come back to my earlier comment. It's not the actual time investment to think about selling your business. It's more about a state of mind. It's more about the way you think about things. And I'll give you an example. I on the podcast not too long ago, on the Business Success Stories podcast, I had an advisor, M&A advisor, share a story about his client. His client had a retail location. It was a business he had been in for over 25 years, extraordinarily profitable. The location he was in was sort of a historical marquee landmark type of location. It wasn't when he first moved in, but it over time became kind of a very known section of town and kind of a destination location and oriented toward tourists and people. Everybody in the community knew where this business was. The square foot sales were sky high. I mean, this guy was just short of minting money, but he had getting older and had some health issues. And so he started thinking about selling his business. And what happened is that the landlord for his location was a personal friend and had always given him a good deal. So every 5 years, they would go to renew the lease. And the lease was, a little bit of rent increase, and attorneys didn't review the lease, and it was just routine. Every 5 years, the lease was renewed. And so 2 years before he was going to be selling the business, he renewed the lease for another 5 years without having it reviewed or looked at all. And when the business went into contract and it was going through the due diligence process, the attorney for the buyer noted that this lease was non-transferable.
Oh.
And because this location was so well known, that was an enormous part of the value of the business because of where it was located. And so the seller says, no problem. I know the landlord. He'll just negotiate a new lease. Well, the lease rates were substantially under market. And now that his friend was moving on and selling the business, when the new lease was presented to the potential buyer, it was 3 times increase in over the existing rent. Now, here's the rub. In that particular location, the multiple of profits that the business was selling for was 5. That meant, and I'll just pull some numbers here for an example. The business was being sold for a couple of $1 million. The profits were $400,000 on that business, and 5 times 400 equals your $2 million. With the rent was increased $100,000. That meant the profitability went down $100,000, the projected profitability. You have a multiple of 5. So 5 times $100,000 is $500,000 of reduced valuation. And so by not thinking strategically about when he was selling the business, I am quite confident, or the advisor was quite confident at the time, if that lease had been renegotiated, most likely a transferability clause would have been put into the lease without any big deal of problem. But once it came up and the deal was in progress and the landlord had a lot of leverage, and knowing that the business is going to have to be there, he used that leverage to bring the value up. It was actually above market at the time. And so what happened is that the seller had no option but to reduce the price to offset the reduced profitability because of the rent increase. So that's what I'm talking about. It wouldn't have taken a lot of time for the seller to think about that. It was just sort of a thought process, an attitude of looking at things. Right. What thing I'm negotiating this lease? How is that going to impact an exit? So that's an hour thought process and thinking through that and talking to a few people and then actually doing something about it. Could have saved him $500,000 most likely. And so that's what I'm talking about. It's years in advance, you don't have time to think about an exit, but you have the thought process of going through with the what ifs. So that's what I'm talking about.
That's a great example, Marvin. That's a really good, it sort of highlights, I guess, what I was saying before about, people like I'm also talking about from personal experience too. Like you find, I find pretty consistently when you think this isn't relating to like exiting a business, but it's a thought process, which is still, it's like any thought process that's applied in that situation or could be applied in that situation where you think some like a task is bigger in your mind than it really is. And it's got nothing to do with like, in sort of many ways, like the task, it sort of does, like the importance of the task sometimes makes that bigger in your mind than it really is. And then when you come, in fact, I did this the other day, like I was doing a job for somebody, and for some reason I just thought this task, I hadn't actually looked at the details of it yet, but I just had this impression in my mind it was going to be bigger than it actually was. And I got to it and it took me like, it was like a half-hour thing. and I was like, oh, well, yeah, there you go. Like there's you make an assumption about something, and then the reality is often quite different. But I guess it highlights pretty much everything you've been saying about like the, pre-planning, I suppose, too, for anything, whether it's thinking about exiting your business or thinking about just about anything in many ways is kind of alleviates the likelihood of things growing in your mind too, because then if you head them off at the pass and you start thinking about them, then they're never going to become like the elephant in the room, I guess, are they?
That's precisely the point, is that if you start thinking about them, you can avoid a little pimple becoming a boil on your face,
That's right, yeah.
And, you just take a little preventative care and things will work out a little bit different. And as I said earlier, planning, thinking about the time that you're going to step away from your business is not rocket science. I don't want to overcomplicate it, but it can become very complex if you wait until the last minute to position and do all the things that needed to be done to get the business sold. It can become very complicated at that point in time because you're scrambling. I'm actually writing a book, and it's going to be called Pack Your Parachute. And it's based on the metaphor of a pilot never packs his parachute when the engines are on fire. That parachute has been packed, it's ready to go. If something unexpected happens, he can head for the exit, grab the parachute, and bail out of the plane. Well, that's kind of a rudimentary metaphor for if you're going to wait to the last minute to pack your parachute, assuming you're going to be exiting your business, you may get the parachute not packed very well. So when it comes time to exit, you don't know if it's really going to open when you jump and make that decision to sell. And so there are some things that you just can do that don't take a lot of time, don't take a lot of effort, but as I'll come back again, it's more of how you think about what a buyer is going to want to see when they are sitting across the table negotiating to buy your business. I've often asked entrepreneurs, business owners, would you pay the amount of money that you're going to be asking for your business if you were the buyer? And they kind of shuffle their feet and look down at the table and say, well, quite frankly, I don't know if I would or not, because they know where the skeletons are buried. They know the problems with the business. And the buyer is going to do his homework and dig and try to find out those issues with the business. And so if you just anticipate what they might be and be ready to answer the questions and have the information available, you'll create a lot of trust and comfort on the buyer's side of the table because you're ready to answer the question. You're not giving the impression that you're providing a half answer or trying to hide something.
Yeah. Yeah. We actually bought many years ago now, as a part of, I guess, a strategy to kind of grow our existing business. We bought another business. So we were a buyer, and we, we'd never done that before, but it was a really interesting sort of process, because like you, from the buyer's point of view, outside of just buying a business because you are hoping it's going to grow your own business, being like pretty green, then as opposed to how I perceive myself now, or at least that's how I see it, with more wealth of more experience, is that I would have, like, even as a buyer, I would have approached it differently. But like, also, I guess the benefits about what you even learn during that process of buying, like buying from somebody else, and all the details that you require, understanding what they've been doing from just a numbers point of view, what they've been, was their profit, how long they've been running for, and all the various details that I remember going through at the time is was certainly a real eye opener then, for us. But I was just going to ask this other question too. It just kind of occurred to me with things we've been talking about with your, say, having the right mental attitude towards things in general, pre-planning, with that idea of exiting your business. Have you found with people that you've been working with in the past that when they initiate that process or get into a different mindset for planning to exit their business, have you found that as a result of doing that, that's actually helped them in running their existing business, like their processes and how they think about just running their business?
Well, I think it's logical to think that it would, and it does. It certainly does. When you are running your business with the anticipation that someone is going to be looking at what you're doing, you tend to do things differently. That comes from documentation of processes and procedures. It comes in how you compile your financial information and financial statements. It comes in how you treat your employees. You want them to be happy. Part of what a buyer is going to be looking at when they're buying their business are the employees. Are they happy? Are they going to stay after the business is sold? And it's very difficult to sell a business if all your employees are unhappy and they find out you're selling and they all start looking for another job. You're going to have a real challenge in extracting any value out of that business. And so when you start thinking like that, what is a buyer going to want to see? And then anticipate that and do things that enhance the value. And in that process of doing things that is enhancing the value down the road, you'll be amazed at how much value is created currently and in real time as you're running your business, because you are paying attention to things that are important for value creation. And things that are important for value creation tend to make customers happier, employees happier, vendors happier, easier to get customers. So it does dramatically change how a business is running currently. And that's absolutely a true principle. It's just like an athlete who's, planning for a race. If he runs the race or participates in whatever sport he's in as if he's playing in the championship game, everything is better in the games leading up to that.
Yeah, very true. There's I find a very strong correlation between, things that I guess we've done and how I see some aspects of business and sport. Maybe that's because I'm a sport-minded person and I enjoy sport, but that's certainly a correlation that I've sort of seen with things too. And I asked that question before, I guess not because it seems like a really obvious answer, but because I would imagine, I mean, this is just an assumption that I'm making, but I would imagine there might be some people who might then be surprised that those benefits have sort of come from such a thing, that instead of going, I'm going to try to improve my processes in my business while I'm just running my business, that you have a positive end result as a result of thinking about exiting your business.
No, absolutely true. I think that the example of sports or almost anything else that you're doing is true. If you practice and perform in your business and as if you're going to be selling it someday, the value creation is real. Not only in a current cash flow basis, because you're just going to have a better running business, but when it gets to the point you want to sell, you have created a lot of positive forward momentum. And that's when you want to sell your business. You do never want to be in the position of selling your business that is stalling out and is not growing. And that's a difficult business to sell. But unfortunately, that's when most entrepreneurs and business owners decide it's time to sell, is when the going gets tough and things are not going well, they decide it's time to sell. And then you just have to walk around, I'm being repetitive here, looking at the buyer buying the business. They're not going to be all that excited about the business because the numbers are starting to show a different story than you want to be telling. The best time to sell a business is when it's on an upward trajectory, has not reached the peak of its performance and market penetration, and there's a lot of opportunity in the future. That's when you'll get a buyer really excited about buying your business. You see the steady sales growth, and you can tell a great story about how much more sales growth there is. And that's what a buyer wants to be buying, is future potential. He doesn't want to be buying a business that is headed downhill. That's not an exciting proposition for any buyer unless they're turnaround specialists.
Yeah,
and most
exactly.
entrepreneurs that are buying a business don't fall into that category. There are people and businesses that do, but generally speaking, you're looking at selling to someone that wants a good business that is operating, that has a lot of growth potential in the future. So that's when you want to sell a business, not when you've squeezed every dollar you can out of the business and there's not a lot of growth potential left.
Yeah, no, of course, that makes a lot of sense. Like in terms of, say, patterns, say, that occur time and time again in business exits that you've seen. Like, you've obviously had a lot of experience with this and talked to a lot of people. Have you identified what some of those patterns might be, say, in terms of, it could be anything, things that come to mind for you that really stand out in terms of like why people do things, or any patterns that are quite common to many business exits?
Absolutely. It's a process. There are key components, key elements that need to be in place when you are looking at selling a business. I'll mention a couple here. And that's kind of what the book I'm writing about is, the key components of packing that parachute, of what's going to be essential when it comes time to exit, what you need to have in place for a buyer to get excited about your business. But one of them is really, are you the entrepreneur that is the business? Can the business operate without you being there? Now, if you're the type of business or type of entrepreneurial profile that you have built your business around yourself and you find it very difficult to get away for a vacation because as soon as you walk out the door, things kind of come to a grinding halt. Well, then you're going to be looking for a buyer for your business that fits that profile, that they're going to be there every day. They have to kind of replace you. And the bucket of buyers out there for that type of business is relatively small. You know, you're looking to replace yourself. And when you're looking to clone yourself and as a buyer, for the buyer of your business out there, you know, you may be able to find just the ideal candidate for your business and you may get lucky, but generally speaking, historically, statistically, the data does not support that that is a great positioning in the market to find a buyer quickly and that's willing to pay top dollar for your business. So, but if you take some time and plan for the future to slowly start replacing yourself so that you'll have, let's just take the example that you're pretty good with people and customers and getting business. Find a person to operate your business that understands the operation of the business while you focus on sales and somebody else focusing on the actual mechanics and operations of the business. If you have a business like that, that's a much easier business to sell because there are more buyers that will look for something where they're also good with people and they have someone already in place that's going to buy the business. Then you take another step up. Well, eventually replace the sales component, the customer component of the business, so that you are overseeing both components. Well, that business, there's a lot more buyers for that type of business than there are for the other two. And then you get buyers that are looking just for great businesses that have great numbers. That if you have those things in place, and there are people out there that will pay a premium for that type of business, a much bigger, maybe, you know, a whole bathtub full of people, you know, versus 2 buckets of people. And then you get the strategic buyer that has a whole bunch of customers, but they don't offer exactly what you're offering. Let's say your competitor or other company out there sells red widgets and you have blue widgets, and they have several thousand customers that have already bought their red widgets. But they think that if they acquired your company, they would also buy your blue widgets. Well, that type of buyer will pay a premium, sometimes many, many more times the value that a financial buyer will pay for your business. And so these different buckets that buyers fall in, if you start thinking about those buckets in advance, instead of 6 months before you're going to sell, then you can kind of position your business properly to appeal to buyers in one of those buckets. And the closer you can get to not being essential to your business, so that you don't have to be there every day, that the business kind of operates without you, the higher price you're going to get and the more buyers you're going to get at the table. And when you have more buyers at the table, you can create an auction, you can create a competition for your business, and that will boost the value of your business significantly.
That's a fantastic answer. That sort of covered a lot of different patterns. I'm sure, you know, many, if not most of those things are things that many people just have never considered, because I mean, I say in terms of patterns, once again, is there a, you know, sort of a quantifiable percentage that you would put on the amount of people who buy a business from more emotional reasons, like outside of obviously buying a business to make money, but they fall into one of those particular categories that you mentioned, and they're more likely to be driven by emotions as opposed to being more strategic and clinical about it?
Yeah, definitely. The first bucket I mentioned, the people that buy businesses on an emotional attachment basis are the people that are actually going to fall into the category of running the business. They like what you do. They can see themselves doing it. They love the product. They may even be a customer. Those people place a high value on emotion and not so much on how much money the business is making, because they can see themselves in the business every day, running it and operating it. But the great portion of people that will fall outside of that category are going to be a lot less emotional about the business and looking more at how the business is running, how profitable it is, what the sales growth is, how does it strategically fit into what they're doing. If they're acquiring it from a strategic basis, they're much less emotionally attached to what you're doing and place little value on that.
Just you mentioned your upcoming book, Pack Your Parachute.
Correct.
Is how far is that away?
It'll be out sometime in the mid to third quarter of next year.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I saw that. I saw that on your website too. That's that's a great metaphor, I think, for that. I really like the sound of it. And just on that, on a related topic too. When I went to your website, you've got like your tagline that you've got there: optimize it, sell it, enjoy it. I really like that, and I guess for people who've been listening then to this podcast, they would kind of perhaps understand why you've got that as your tagline. But if they haven't, could you just tell them, I guess, a little bit about what that represents, why you have that as your tagline?
Well, a good business is one that is scaling, but scale alone doesn't mean you're profitable. So you need to optimize the operations of your business, the profitability of your business. Once you've launched your business, then you're going to grow your business. And at some point in time, you have to start looking at how to optimize that growth, because growth for growth's sake doesn't mean a whole lot. You can be growing 20, 30% a year in sales, but your profitability doesn't grow. That's not a very saleable business in most cases. And so when you can optimize the value, and there's a number of ways to do that, but when you optimize the value, you're going to be able to walk away from the sale with a large amount of money in your bank account, and that's when you can enjoy it. And some people enjoy it for a while, like me, and then get bored and want to jump back into the game. But that's the goal of most business people, is at some point in time, not only to make money while you're running the business, but to extract value out of something that you've created. Unfortunately, as we've been talking about here, a lot of people don't think much about that. And when the time comes to extract that value, they have a very difficult time of extracting that value out of the business. And it shouldn't be. A business should be easy to sell, because you've done a great job of making money, building a good customer base, creating a lot of goodwill. Why wouldn't someone want to build and buy that business, and continue to build it? The problem is that you don't create the narrative, you don't create the data to support the story that you're going to tell when you sell your business. People are going to say, why are you selling? If it's such a great business, why are you selling? Well, you need to be able to answer that question confidently and convincingly. And if you can, well, it'll make sense to the buyer, You don't want to say, well, I'm selling because, you have to be definitive, have that really locked down. I'm selling because, I have come to the point where I want to enjoy my life. My wife wants to go out with the grandkids a lot of times, and we want to travel.
Excuse me.
And that is why we're selling the business. Well, that makes sense, And you need then to support, well, okay, how great of a business is it then? Well, take a look at my financial statements, take a look at my customer base, take a look at my technology, take a look at this, take a look at that. This is a great business, but I'm moving on. If you're the type of person that can take it to the next level, let me talk about that. We have expecting 20, 30% growth next year, and it could be more. Well, that can get somebody excited about buying your business.
Yeah. 100%. I mean, that's I would imagine there would be people too who are looking at, say, a potential buyer, and if they get to a point where they have an understanding of a buyer's skill set or what might be different that they're bringing to the table that they may not have been, that's a part of the business, but they've never grown that particular part, but that potential buyer is especially good at this other part. They've got an opportunity to say to them, in whatever way they say it, that they've got an opportunity because they know they're particularly good at this area to grow that particular part of the business. I mean, that would be a selling point in itself, I suppose, in a different sort of way, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. If you can identify the right type of buyer, and a lot of that comes from thinking in advance of who is the buyer going to be? What am I looking for?
Yeah, it comes back to planning again, doesn't it? Yeah, having a good plan.
Yeah, it just comes back, if you understand who you think you're going to be talking to a year or two down the road, then you structure the narrative, the story, the information, the data to support that buyer when you're talking to them, to support the value at that time.
Yeah. So as we're, I guess, nearing the end of the podcast too, Marvin, have you got any, and we've covered quite a few different things, but have you got any other really particular points that you'd like to share with everyone?
I think that for those that are listening to the podcast that haven't really started thinking about it, my only comment is don't wait too long. It doesn't take time, a lot of time invested to position your business for sale. It's more of a thought process, and you need to begin that thought process at some point in time. And it is better to do it sooner than later.
And what would you, just as a segue to that too, what would you say to business owners who say they'd never exit their business, not in a million years? They say, if you said to them, you should be thinking about exiting your business, and they say I'm never going to do that. What would you say to them, Marvin?
There's only 3 things that can happen to a business. Well, 4 maybe. One is that you're going to pass it on to a family member, a friend, an employee, someone you know. You're going to pass it on to someone you don't know, a third party that's going to buy it. You're going to go out of business or liquidate the business, or you're going to live forever. It's one of those 4. And so pick which one fits your situation and then plan for it.
Yeah, great answer. Yeah, that's great. And on that note too, would you be so kind as to share with everyone a quote, a relevant quote, or one that you like that relates to what we've been speaking about, or just one that you particularly like?
Well, a quote Winston Churchill once said that, when you're engaged in warfare, in a battle, it's, it's always great to have a battle plan. And when the first shot is fired, it goes out the window. But it's the planning, it's in the planning that the value is, because once you've done the plan, you understand how things are going to change, and you can improvise and change in real time and change your plan. And I think it's just the same with a business. If you have a plan, that it may not work out well, but because you've gone through the planning process, when things change, when it comes time to sell, you're so familiar with how you're thinking about the exit process, you'll be able to adapt and change to meet the current circumstances.
That's a fantastic end note. Thank you so much for that. That's terrific. Could you also just let everyone know, in closing, the best way to get in contact with you, the best way to find out about what you do online or sort of otherwise? What's the best way?
Well, I would suggest, I wish I'd have had a podcast like the one I have to listen to all these stories. Every podcast has 4 stories, real transactional stories, and the takeaways. I would suggest that everyone, wherever you get your podcasts, go to just search for Business Exit Stories and subscribe and listen to the podcast. You'll learn a ton of information. I don't care if you're selling in a year or 10 years from now, you're going to learn a lot. I also have a free download on how to double the value of the money you put in your pocket. That's available at the podcast website, businessexitstories.com/report. You can just download that there. Those are the best 2 ways. You can also reach me if you needed some other information, just at mstorm@businessexitstories.com. That's M as in Marvin, storm as in the weather. And I'll be glad to answer any questions. I get a lot of questions that come in.
Thank you, Marvin. Thanks so much for being on the podcast. It's been a real pleasure. It's been super informative. And thanks so much for sharing your knowledge and stories with everyone. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed the discussion. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, no, thank you. And so with that in mind, that's actually it for today, guys. Thanks so much for listening into our podcast yet again. Before we go, please leave your feedback as well as any suggestions for any topics you would like us to discuss in future episodes. Thanks again for listening to the Grow Your Business podcast, and we'll see you again soon. Bye, guys.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Grow Your Business. Have a great day, and